Well, hi, everyone. Welcome to the genetics segment. I'm super excited to be with Richard Lynn. He's the CEO of Thryve. Richard, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So to give the audience a little bit more context, we spent a lot of time looking at well over 200 different, what we call companies a part of the genetics category. And we came across Thryve because we were super excited about what they're doing within sequencing services, but also the number of products that you guys are building on top of that. And so I invited Richard here so that we can have a little bit more in-depth discussion, not only about the products, the services you offer, and some of the unique aspects of what you guys are doing at Thryve. So with that, Richard, I think it's to kind of give the audience a good visual. We'll jump right into that video that you have, and or the visual, and then we'll go from there. Yeah.
All right, sounds good. So yeah, just to give you a quick intro, Richard, the CEO of Thryve, and we'd like to call ourselves the 23andMe for the microbiome. Started this company because about 4 years ago, I took antibiotics, ended up getting really sick. Talked to multiple different doctors. They said, you're too young and healthy looking to be sick. And kind of through that experience, started learning about the microbiome, which is the bacteria, the yeast, and the viruses that reside inside and outside our bodies. And science has been showing how they're related to all things related to our health, from digestion, immunity, mental health, weight gain, and so forth. So we offer a direct consumer product that includes both a physical test kit that looks at your stool. You sample, send that in 1 to 2 weeks, you get a report back, which I'll kind of show and demo it right here. But essentially you get a dashboard, you get an overall score that you can look at of exactly kind of the makeup of microbes, how those balances are, and kind of your state of healthiness in regards to diversity, as well as the ratios of microbes, and diversity being the overarching amount of species that we found in your gut, which science has been showing is related to a healthy gut. And on top of that, you can look at other metrics. So we'll specifically call out all the different good bacteria that we picked up, which ones are deficient, that needs work, which ones are within healthy ranges, and so forth. Obviously, you can click on actions to learn more about how to take action to improve them. We also have a feature called symptom likeliness. So based on the current research and the specific microbes that we've seen, whether it's deficiencies in good microbes or an overgrowth of bad microbes, how likely you are to have certain symptoms. And then subsequent to that, you can also look at every single species of bacteria that we picked up in your body. Science has been showing there's tens of thousands of different species, all with different functions in the body. You can click into each one. And what we've done is we use machine learning and natural language processing to summarize 50,000 research articles on each microbe. So their health effects, their symptoms, associated diseases, and so forth. So you can go in and read the research as well as get a better understanding of those different microbes. So that's more of the kind of diagnostic part of the product. If you're looking at more specifically, what do I actually do about it now? We have a customized probiotic, a physical supplement that we also ship to our customers as well. And it's analysis based on 3 things. So our algorithm looks at an overgrowth of pathogens in the gut. And if you have an overgrowth, we'll tell you specifically which good probiotics can create something called bacteriolysins, which are naturally occurring antibiotics that can reduce bad bacteria. Or we look at a deficiency of good microbes and in which probiotics can go into them. And then the third one is your health survey. And so we list all the different strains, their benefits, and then you can order and get your probiotics. And then subsequent to that, probiotics like to eat food. They're called prebiotics, and usually you get these prebiotics from natural food sources, different fibers. So we actually customize a food plan based on your makeup of microbes. So which foods can actually decrease bad bacteria and which ones can increase good bacteria. So you can see these are all the different good bacteria that I would like to increase. And then it'll pull up all the different foods that are best fit for me. So for instance, celery is good for me because I'm actually deficient in bifidobacterium, allosteps, and akkermansia, which are good microbes in the gut. So if I eat more celery, I should be able to increase these to improve my health. And that's the core product. We also have a premium feature where we have advanced reports. I won't go into all of them, but essentially we can look at inflammation based on the microbes. We can look at different food intolerances like lactose intolerance, gluten, and so forth. Intestinal permeability, which is leaky gut. We can look at metabolism of fat, protein, and carbs based on the microbes, as well as your sleep hormones like GABA and serotonin, vitamin production like K, vitamin K and B12, and in cardiovascular health, autoimmunity health, digestive health, and so forth. And so that's a brief overview of the app. We have a lot more exciting products coming out in the near future, and I'd love to talk a little bit more about that as we move on.
Cool. Well, thanks, Richard. This is awesome. Thanks for
Absolutely.
the live visual. So I have a handful of questions that I wanted to ask you that kind of detail some of the product. A lot of them you may have already answered, but I'm still going to highlight them anyways. But the big overarching question that I want to start with is, why did you start this company? Is there a type of backstory behind this?
Yeah, absolutely. So taking a little step back, my career, my profession has always been in product management. So I built software products in Silicon Valley. And about 4 years ago, I took an antibiotic for a viral infection. So I just had a flu or a cold. My doctor thought I had bronchitis, which is a bacterial infection. So he gave me antibiotics. And if you look at every antibiotic and disclaimer and side effects, there's something called C. diff, which is a superbug, kills about 15,000 Americans a year. And essentially what antibiotics does, especially broad spectrum antibiotics, is it wipes out all the different bacteria in the body. So not only the bad ones, but also the good ones. And we have good microbes in our guts because they help synthesize vitamins, they help improve our immunity. They actually work in a symbiotic relationship with us. And so because of taking this antibiotic, all the good microbes are gone, and C. diff started overgrowing in my stomach. I had unrelenting digestive problems. And so I went to my doctor, actually 3 different doctors, and said, hey, I have really, really bad symptoms, going to the bathroom like 15 times a day. My stomach hurts, I can't sleep, all kinds of stuff. And they said, oh, you're probably just depressed. You're probably just a hypochondriac. Here's some antidepressants. And through that experience, I started going online and talking to different folks dealing with chronic illness. And they said, oh, based on your medical history, what you told us, it sounds like you probably have something called C. diff. You should go get that tested and treated. So I got my 4th opinion, got a DNA test on C. diff. It came back positive both on the bacteria as well as the toxin. And I got a fecal transplant. And if your audience is not familiar with that, it's essentially you get somebody healthy, their stool, you homogenize it, with sterile water, and then you put it back into an unhealthy person to repopulate their microbes. So I got that done, and I felt much better afterwards. And kind of through that experience, I started researching the microbiome. I was reading research, scientific journals for the entire year, and realized there wasn't really a good product that can help everyday consumers understand what is a microbiome, what is my microbiome, and ultimately, what can I do about it? And so that's why I started.
Awesome. And typically in this space, you see a lot of healthcare companies, a lot of the motivation behind it is a personal experience. And this is interesting. Now, the actual product and service itself, it's as simple as you're doing the microbe testing by taking, in this case, samples, which are feces. I'm not sure if you take other types of samples as well. And then you analyze that and you try to give it back to your customers and figuring out what they can do with that information. First question is, when we get to the genetics category, a lot of people tend to go towards analyzing different types of users' DNA. Why did you focus on microbiome? I mean, you gave the backstory about why, but why specifically is microbiome important and also an interesting space?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when you think about human DNA, obviously it's important as well. And originally scientists thought, the human DNA was going to be the book of life. Once we figure out DNA, medicine's completely going to change. Everything's going to change based on DNA. And we realized that with that same technology that we use to sequence DNA, you can use that to sequence, the RNA of the microbes in your gut. And that really actually opened up the book of life. The genetics was kind of the table of contents, if you will. And, the microbes are something that we can actively change through lifestyle, through diet, through these different things. Your human DNA, unless you use CRISPR or something like that to edit your genes, they're set in stone, right? So they're important, but there's also not as much influence that can be done by the individual, whether with therapies or so forth. And so I think that's where it's really exciting, because we discovered that there's these tens of thousands of species of microbes in people, which we never knew before. Because if you look at the old method of finding out if a bacteria is in a person, it's a petri dish, you got to grow in a medium, figure out if it exists there. Now with DNA sequencing, we can see this huge community of microbes that we couldn't see before. And that same technology, and I'm sure your audience is well aware, when you look at the cost of genome sequencing, it's gone down tremendously. The first strand of human DNA costs $300 million to sequence. That same technology can be brought to your door to sequence the microbiome for under $100. Completely unheard of, and that the scale of technology and the lowering of costs is actually going faster than Moore's law in semiconductors. And so it's a very exciting time because the technology exists now, and we're discovering that these microbes are related to all kinds of different disease states. So when you look at chronic illness like Alzheimer's, you look at Parkinson's, you look at inflammatory bowel disease, all these disparate diseases that you would think that are not related to the gut have a different microbial profile than a healthy population. So with all this kind of advances, it's a very exciting time for medicine.
Cool. And I guess with that, kind of building off that question, the actual sequencing of the microbiomes themselves, how involved are you in that process? Are you sending your test kits to third-party labs? Are you doing that yourself? What kind of equipment are you using if you're doing it yourself? How does that process work on the back end?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we actually don't own the lab. We outsource that to another commercial lab based in Southern California. They do everything from the extraction process to the library prep to the sequencing, essentially all the wet lab work. Our team is really the software and the data. So we do the dry lab work, which includes the bioinformatics pipeline, which we built. It's proprietary to us. Multiple different open source tools like Kraken. We use the NIH database to build all that out. But essentially, we're mainly the software component of the business. And the rest of the wet lab work, we outsource that. So,
okay. And then just kind of a curious question on a little bit more of the logistics of managing samples. Is managing samples for you, is it difficult? Do you have a time crunch? Do samples at a certain time expire? Going to another lab, are you part of that process, or this is something that's completely managed by the lab?
Yeah, absolutely. So because we are, the brand, we have the physical product that we send out. We thought about this very thoroughly in terms of the methods and collection process to ensure that the sample that gets, done at the individual's home all the way to getting to the lab is still the same sample. And what we realize is, there's two types of kits out on the market. They either use antibiotics in the buffer to collect the cells or the microbes, or they use a dry swab. Now, both methods are actually pretty problematic. So the dry swab method, obviously, there's no collection fluid, the microbes can grow. And depending on temperature and environment, especially if you're shipping it and it's like a hot, on the way there, it's, the temperature is very high. Proteobacteria can actually overgrow. And then you have this thing called proteobacteria bias. It's a list of different pathogens that are not normally at that high count in the gut. But when it gets to the lab, it looks like the person has a huge growth of proteobacteria. So that's a very broken method. Then you look at the antibiotic method. And the reason why they use antibiotics is because they lyse the cells when you store the sample. So the bacteria can't grow. So only the DNA is falling out. And then you can extract that and then put that into the sequencing machine and say, oh, okay, here's what the bacteria looks like. But when you lyse the cells, it actually muddles up the sequencing process. So when you actually do the extraction of DNA, it causes also bias. And so we looked at all the kits in the market. These are the methods. And we actually created our own buffer. It's proprietary to us. Essentially, we store the cells in stasis. They don't grow. We don't lyse them, right? There's no antibiotics in there. And they're able to stay maintained like that at higher temperatures for up to 2 months in the shipping process. And it usually never takes 2 months to get to us. It's like 1 to 2 day shipping. But because we have this method in place, by the time we sequence it and it gets to, the software and the analytics and what the customer sees in their data is the most accurate.
Okay. Interesting. And when you receive these samples and you go and sequence them, I'm curious, generally, and maybe it's evolved as you started, but you've already kind of highlighted this, finding every bacteria that exists in your system. But is that everything that you're looking for? Just trying to identify every bacteria that exists within your gut?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we are only looking at bacteria right now. We do have plans to look at yeast and viruses in the future. Kind of the grander vision isn't just to look at the gut microbiome. We have a vaginal test coming out that's going to look at the vaginal microbiome at the end of this quarter. We want to launch an infant and child microbiome test because their gut is much different than an adult. And then we want to look at the skin microbiome as well as the oral microbiome. So those are all on our roadmap to go down. And that's just purely on the microbe side. Eventually, we're building out a grander vision called omics as a service. So when you're thinking about genomics, you're thinking about metatranscriptomics, which is microbiome, and an exposomics, which is environmental exposure, chemicals, toxins, BPA, and so forth. We really believe these three different types of testing will be the future of healthcare, going from a more reactive healthcare 1.0 to more predictive, personalized, and preventative healthcare 2.0. And by looking at DNA, we should be able to use machine learning to predict how susceptible somebody is to a certain symptom or disease, and what kind of intervention should we be able to take, whether it's with natural means, with supplements, as well as food, or maybe even some pharmaceuticals that are best fit for the person. So getting down to more of a precision medicine approach.
Yeah, it's a great segue, because the follow-up question that I wanted to ask for this, and one of the things that we were kind of impressed by, is it's not just the sequencing services that you're providing. And, here's your data. It's you, on top of that, you have built in what you've already showed us, this health management platform that says, this is what we've understood from basically the test that you've done and what you can do about it. And that includes everything that you suggested, which is the diet suggestions, the probiotic supplements that you could take. You have a wellness score. I want to talk about all these, but you kind of highlighted it, but I just want to highlight it again. How did you manage to collect all this data necessary to provide recommendations like this? And expect, whether that's the personalized recommendations or that's the different type of bacteria species, where did this come from?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's there's different open source databases from like the NIH and so forth that can index all the different microbes. But in terms of getting down to, not just what's there, but why it matters and what can I do about it, that's a whole different set of questions, different set of products and services. Like I mentioned, there's 50,000 plus research articles on the microbiome. Some of the research is stronger than the others, but essentially many of these research maps out different microbes or different food sources that can potentially affect microbes and so forth. And so we used natural language processing and machine learning to find signals in research to be able to categorize all this content, because it's a lot of content and it's growing at a pretty rapid speed. It's about 40% year over year in growth in terms of new microbiome research published. When you look at genetics, it's only 3% year over year. And so, for us, we were able to index all that, and we hired, a team of PhDs, probably about 15 PhDs from a different country. We're early startups, so we had to be scrappy. But essentially, they would manually review the machine learning NLP output and put that into a database, and then that went into our app, into our recommendations. So if you look at every single one of our recommendations, every single food, every single probiotic that we recommend, there's a list of research studies that we quoted, and we also grade that research. So we have a feature called our research confidence algorithm that looks at, was this in vivo testing? Was it in vitro? Was it human clinical studies? Was it double-blind placebo randomized trial? How large of a sample size was it? Duration of the sample of the study? And we look at all that to give you a weight of strong, medium, emerging, or mixed research based on each recommendation, which no other competitor in our space does. Every other microbiome company is a black box, if you will. They say, eat a broccoli, and you don't know why. And then if they change their algorithm, all of a sudden, your broccoli is a superfood, 1 week, and then next week it's an avoid food. And you're like, where's the science, right? So we try to provide as much transparency back to the consumer to say, hey, we're telling you to eat a broccoli, but the research here is still mixed. So take it, with a grain of salt. But for this food, it's much stronger because there's a lot more research. It's a lot more, credible and so forth. So that's kind of how we put the V1 of the product together. And as we continue to grow our database, of users, people submit their information, survey information and so forth. We're able to pattern match through machine learning to be able to, categorize even further. So we really think about our database as the largest omics research platform in the world. That's where we want to get to, right? Rather than going to publications, they're going to start tapping into Thryve to better understand all the omics data coming out. So.
And I think that that's really how you've been able to scale personalized recommendations, is sifting through all this research, trying to figure out what bacteria, what does that actually mean for the gut, and then in this case rate it, and then from the tests of each individual, you're just referencing the research that you have.
Exactly. Yep.
Cool. Wow. I mean, it's some of the things when on the outside in, it's you don't even know that you're working on some of these things at this scale, which is exactly why we
don't let the consumer brand friendly website fool you that there's no, not as much tech or science, right? But there's a lot going on in the plumbing. So
cool. I'm curious, and this is kind of a touchy topic, but from and you talked about even the pipeline, what you hope to get in the future, but from what you're doing today with the microbiome test, are you starting to get into different forms of diagnosis, or are you also trying to get into categories where helping individuals manage things like chronic diseases? I know there's regulations might be conflicting in this particular area. I'm curious how you compare those two.
Yeah, I mean, for our team and our roadmap, we'd like to stay in the health and wellness sector for the next 2 to 3 years. And the idea here is, we're starting out as a data/growth, consumer internet growth company, and really the ability to go down kind of a more diagnostic and therapeutic route, whether it's through the FDA and so forth, working with doctors, is going to require that large data set. It's going to require, us to validate proof of concepts, pilots, to clinical studies and so forth. So we'd like to start there, very similar to the way 23andMe has approached it. Started on consumer, got to about 1 million genomes, and then they started building out a more of a biotech, healthcare focused business, working with GSK and so forth, developing drugs and doing that kind of research. That's what we'd like to eventually get to. We want to prove out that, there's adherence to the product, because that's one of the biggest issues as well. Like psychologically, can you get the patient to actually follow the instructions of their health, their healthcare and so forth? Doctors will say this is one of the hardest things for some chronic patients. Take your pills, do this, change your lifestyle, eat a healthier diet, and so forth. So if we can change behavior, that's fantastic. And then can we actually get the science to work with omics, predicting and providing therapies? And eventually, once we can prove that out with strong validated research, we can go down the health insurance path and say, hey, we can get your patients off drugs. We can get them off synthetics. We can use, personalized food sources. We can use personalized supplements and these kind of things at a much more affordable cost to, what you have to pay out as an insurance company. And we can get them adhering to it and healthier, right? They'll continue to pay the premiums, but they'll never go into the hospital to, rack up the cost, right? And it's a win-win, right? It's a win for the insurance companies. It's a win for the patients, right? We can get to the root cause. We can use healthy sources, natural sources to improve their health. And really that's kind of our mission, is to do that.
Cool. And I'm curious, just to kind of follow up from that as well. How often should individuals be taking a microbiome test?
Yeah, it's a great question. We generally recommend 4 times a year, so you can get a good longitudinal view of your microbes. One of the challenges with the microbiome is, depending on your lifestyle, you could have a very different sample, very close to each other. So for instance, you could have taken an antibiotic last week and sampled, and then the following week take another sample, and your microbiome could look different, right? Because your microbes grow or are lacking based on kind of your lifestyle. or if you change your diet, right? If you go from pure vegan to just pure meat eating, your microbiome is going to change in a couple of days. And so we like having more, data points in order to show the trend, so you don't get this kind of volatility. And that's where you really get the most value in the microbiome test, to see the longitudinal data in regards to your microbiome. Genetics is different, right? You just do it once, never really changes. But the microbiome is kind of built in that way. We do try to encourage our customers not to have any drastic lifestyle changes before they do their test, but you never know, right? So,
right. Yeah. There's a couple times that you mentioned the American Gut Project. Can you talk a little bit more about what this is?
Yeah, absolutely. So the American Gut Project is started by Professor Knight in UC San Diego. And I believe he launched the organization about 5 years ago, but it was an open source project where people could buy microbiome tests when it didn't exist. So, American Gut was pretty much the front runner of getting microbiome tests out to consumers. And, all the samples are anonymized, but they have health information as well as microbial information. And, what areas were sampled, was it the vaginal, was it gut, and so forth. And they released this data publicly for anybody to use. So anybody that wants to run research on it now has a microbiome data set. So we use their microbiome data set on top of our own. So when we compare folks to the healthy average as a benchmark, we use both American Gut's database as well as our own database to normalize it. And so they've been a huge help, obviously, for the microbiome industry, because they've open sourced this information, and they're part of our research organization and not in it for a profit. And so they've done a fantastic job with kind of moving the industry along.
Okay. Now, not only have you done in offering microbiome tests, you built out a health management platform. You've also built on the back end now an incredible database with algorithms that can now basically benchmark a lot of research. And then you take that one step further, which is also one of the reasons why we thought you're one of the best companies within the genetics category. You guys are building and providing your own customized probiotics based on individuals' tests. I mean, you ship that to individual. Really unique. It's something that it's not very common. There's some telemedicine startups that are trying to, most of them are in the mental health category, that try to provide some form of medication. But most companies are not in this space. Why did you launch your own probiotic? And I mean, how did you launch your own probiotic? I mean, it feels like it would be really a whole different world than, on the software side.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, when you look at Thryve, and it's multidisciplinary, right? You have, your physical product, you have your consumer branding, you have your computer science, you have your supply chain. There's just a whole gamut of things to get this product out to market. So it definitely was a challenge. Thankfully, we're not in the probiotic manufacturing business. There's a lot much better companies out there that have put in, a large amount of funding, a large amount of research and development into developing new strains of probiotics that we partner with in order to kind of build out our own formulas, if you will. So it definitely wasn't easy. We definitely had a large evaluation process of different organizations and firms that have their own strains. What does their clinical research look like, and validating that to bring in the right strains. We have about 30 different unique strains in our personalization method, if you will. So we've partnered with multiple manufacturers around the world, from Asia, Europe, and the US, in order to catalog these different strains to do our personalization. And so we got in this space because obviously, you think about microbiome tests, it's great. You can get the food recommendations, but really we think about the longevity of, I don't like to say patients, because, obviously we're not a medical diagnostic or a therapeutic company. But, when we think about our customers and how do we get them to adhere to longer term interventions without dropping off. So the food recommendations obviously is a huge source for longer term gain, right? If your diet is garbage, you're putting bad things in, you're not going to feel well. But, diet does take a little bit longer for people to feel the benefits. So how do you immediately get them to feel benefits right away? and probiotics is a great segue. With digestive customers, with some autoimmune and so forth, like eczema, we see different strains work in people immediately. In like 1 to 3 days, huge resolution in symptoms, and they feel the benefit right away. And you need that kind of that little carrot that dangles to get people to continue with the food, right? And so we see it as a way to keep the attention and keep the behavioral modification for the user or the customer, as well as there's a benefit with the probiotics, right? Adhering in the gut, providing the benefits, feeling better, and so forth. So we felt that the solution wouldn't be complete if it was just a test and food. It would have to encompass a full program or a full package.
Interesting. And the partners that you have, they provide the custom probiotics, and they can actually do that at a reasonable cost per individual.
So they actually provide the raw powder for the strains, and then we put them together in the US. Yeah. When they come from different parts. Yeah.
And how are you able to scale that customization process? Do you have your own internal team that basically is putting together the powders for each individual customer? I mean, how does this process work?
So what I would say is we're not hyper personalization. We're not building individual pills for each person.
Sure.
At that scale, obviously the unit economics wouldn't work. You'd be losing money on every bottle unless you charge them $200 a bottle, right? So we have multiple different formulas, and then based on our algorithm, we'll fit you within one of the formulas for that.
The right class. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And it will continue to adjust as you do your second test, and we see changes in levels. We'll say, okay, your current formula is probably not the best fit. We're gonna switch you over, and we'll continue to add more formulas across our current 30 unique strains.
Okay. And I guess you talked about the importance of being able to allow customers to see the benefits right away. And that's why you brought probiotics forward. Do you ever get worried about customers not changing their health behaviors, but thinking probiotics might be just a quick fix and they can take a pill and everything's gone?
Yeah, I mean, that we definitely see that sometimes. It's just hey, I'm gonna take my probiotic, but I'm gonna go drinking binge for the next week, and I'm supposed to feel better, and it's it doesn't work that way. So the software does play a big part in encouraging behavior. Little triggers, email notifications, so forth. Hey, it's time to get back, right? So they really do work in conjunction, right? Like the software, and Facebook is probably the best company that's built this into their product. The behavior of being addicted to the product to keep checking in. But then the good thing about us is we're building that out, making it better, but it's for your health, right? Let's get you addicted to better health. So
yeah, cool. Kind of taking a big step back from the product, I'm curious, what does that business model look like for you guys? I mean, it feels like you are a direct consumer company, but you have a lot of different ambitions. What does this actually look like?
Yeah, so we're very focused on kind of D2C, B2C essentially. And we have a lot of different products in our roadmap that are coming out. We have personalized prebiotics coming out soon. We have multiple different testing. We're going to be going down the personalized vitamin route as well. So you get your vitamins and your probiotics and prebiotics. So from the consumer side, we really strongly believe we can build this into $1 billion business just on that alone. But when you look at kind of the B2B side of our business as well, it's also a big market. We're currently running clinical studies on the B2B side for Fortune 500 companies because we have such a large engaged user base and we have the sequencing and the data capabilities. So we're doing that. We have full CRO capabilities. So we act as a CRO to get an IRB approval to run human clinical studies. We, not only do the recruiting of the patients, onboarding, data aggregation, data analysis, and then study publication. That entire kind of life cycle our company can do as well. And that's just on the pure clinical study B2B side. Then there's, technology licensing, which we've had conversations with, different distribution partnerships, with retail. And then there's two other areas that are a little bit smaller, but we believe builds defensibility around our business. The first one is health practitioners as a market. So we have functional medicine doctors, naturopaths, dietitians, and so forth that works as a channel. They actually use our product as a consumer. So they buy a bunch of kits and they resell it to their patients. So we're actually building out a product for them. They have a portal. They can go in, they can manage their patients. They can get certified on genetics. They can get certified on probiotics and so forth and be, certified under Thryve to be able to, provide consultation. And because we have such a growing lead gen business on the consumer side, we essentially become a lead gen source for these practitioners. Everything's going virtual now. So if there's a practitioner in functional medicine, specifically focused on digestion and is certified in genetics, we can funnel them customers that are interested in getting that white glove service and talking to an expert. And so that builds out a whole two-sided marketplace or network effects part of our business. And then we also have the academic research side. Academics and universities like reaching out to us because our sequencing is so much faster and so much more affordable than their institutions. So the universities also have sequencing capabilities, but they have one machine, extremely slow, extremely expensive, and we can do it at 10x the speed, 10x the affordability than them. So that's a whole other B2B side of the business as well.
Wow, you have your hands full.
It's busy.
Yeah. I'm just curious, is there any risks, limitations, or anything that you're worried about?
Yeah, I mean, like any early stage business, there's always risk. Obviously, every business is going through this right now, or the black swan of COVID, right? How does that affect your business and so forth? I can definitely dive into that a little bit more. There's risk of other competitors being in the space that muddle up the water and destroy the credibility and the trust for consumers. There can be companies that come out, make all kinds of claims and don't deliver on them, and that could kind of destroy the market. Hopefully that's not the case, and then there's always some regulatory risk. We have to be very aware of the regulations and play within the rules of the FDA. And we see ourselves as partners with them. We're not here to disrupt them or do anything like that. So there's that aspect as well. But yeah, that's kind of where I see risk lying.
Okay. And yeah, let's dive into the big question. How has the pandemic changed things for you?
Yeah, no, the pandemic's interesting in different fronts. So on the pure top line revenue perspective, we're growing in double digits per month. And so we're doing healthy there. Our marketing efficiency has actually gotten better on the consumer channels, so like Facebook ads, Google ads, influencer marketing, and so forth. And so we're growing pretty rapidly, and with a very small team as well, which is fantastic. We were cash flow break even for a little bit, and we've scaled up the team, so we're burning a little bit more, but very good runway. We have over 2 years of runway at this point. The customers are very excited. Net new customers. People are at home more, shopping more. Health is more top of mind for folks. So if anything, it's actually benefited us, and because both our sequencing lab as well as our business selling vitamins and being a fulfillment process, we're essential business. So we're also not affected by any lockdowns, which is fantastic. And our team traditionally has been working remote half the week anyways. So we go into the office Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Tuesday, Thursdays. Everyone gets to work from home even before the pandemic hit. So when we transitioned to full remote, no one felt the difference. So it was a pretty smooth process, and we're very grateful and fortunate to have that. I know other folks are potentially struggling through it, so doesn't always happen that way, but we're thankful that we're here. So
great. Yeah, there's always a silver lining in situations like this. Last couple questions here that I had for you. Where do you think the future of genetic related services are going, and what do you see that most people don't?
Yeah, it's a great question. I like to start out with a professor. His name is Dr. Larry Smarr, and he has a video on YouTube called The Future Disease. He's a professor at UC San Diego that was able to predict his Crohn's disease, 8 to 10 years before it happened. And the way his story kind of evolved was, he went to his doctor, got a whole bunch of labs done as a normal checkup. One of his labs, called CRP, which looks at inflammation through the blood, was 5 times over the healthy average. And he went to his doctor and said, "Hey, why is this 5 times over?" And the doctor tells him, "You're probably just unique. I don't know." And as a scientist, he was like, "That doesn't make any sense. I'm going to dig in." So he started digging in, 500 plus ish tests, multiple labs over, the course of multiple years. Then he started incorporating genetic testing, human genetic testing, as well as microbial testing. And back then, the technology wasn't quite there yet. So in order to sequence the microbiome, he actually had to use UC San Diego's supercomputer to get the data, but he had access to it because he was a professor. And so he started looking at all his labs, created a dashboard, and the things that were out of range would light up as red. And he would look into the research and say, okay, my CRP is over, I have snippets in my DNA that are more prominent. My microbiome has an overgrowth of E. coli. Now let me put this picture together. Let me look at the research. And he was like, oh my goodness, based on the research, I might have Crohn's. Right? So he asked his doctor, "Can you do an endoscopy? Can you do a colonoscopy?" Because that's kind of the gold standard. You put a microscope in your stomach to see if there's little inflammation, little patches of bleeding, in order to verify if you have Crohn's. So the doctor did it, nothing, super clean. And there was no problem there. And the doctor's like, "Well, you probably most definitely don't have Crohn's. I don't see anything." But what was actually happening was on a microscopic level where you couldn't see it. And there was microinflammation that you couldn't see on the scope. And so a couple years later, does another colonoscopy, does another endoscopy, boom, starts seeing inflammation in the gut. And so why did I tell this whole long-winded story? Well, the idea is that using omics, using any sort of genetic testing from human, microbial, and environmental, we can essentially scale down the amount of effort, time, and resources that Larry Smarr did to find out he had Crohn's, down to 500 plus tests over multiple years, down to 3 tests that can say, hey, based on this analysis of your DNA, your microbial, and your environmental, you're more susceptible to have these kind of problems. Now do these gold standard tests, look at your vitamin levels, look at your inflammation levels, and so forth, and double verify, right? So we're starting at the root and working our way, right? Versus what Larry Smarr had to do, he had to, okay, I have a problem, let me reverse engineer all the way back to the root cause. And that took so much time, so much money. Like, for him as a professor, he had access to those tools. Everyday consumers don't, right? So I really believe that's where the future of healthcare is going to be, where we're able to use machine learning, use these different tests, next generation DNA testing, genetics, to predict where illness is going to go, verify it through additional gold standard testing, and then provide interventions. Let's start with natural means. Can we affect the labs? Can we affect the trajectory and the outcome? If not, then let's move to pharmaceuticals, right? But I really believe this is where healthcare is going to go in the future. And that's where, Thryve is going to be headed.
Wow. It's a great story.
Thank you.
That's
a little
awesome.
long-winded, but.
No, I was, no, this is incredible. With that, Richard, that was really all the questions that I had for you. I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to end on, if there's anything that you're looking for that you would want to announce to the audience at all. It's all you. Otherwise, you can end with any closing statements that you have.
Well, first of all, this has been an extremely enjoyable experience. Love the deep-seated questions to better understand our business and genetics. And so I'm super happy to be here and grateful to be able to share with your audience. If you want to find us, our website's www.thriveinside.com. You can spell it with the Y, for Thryve, or an I. You can also find us on all our social channels, from Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, so forth. Same thing with Thryve Inside. There's no specific ask. I know there's probably investors and other specific folks that are watching this. And so we are raising a Series A in February. And if you'd like to start building a relationship, better understanding of our business and where we'd like to go, be happy to have that conversation as well.
Great. Well, Richard, thanks again. And like we mentioned at the very beginning, you are one of the best companies within this space. And I hope the audience now has at least a deeper understanding of why we thought you're one of the top companies within the genetics category. So thank you so much for taking the time to share this. Really appreciate it. And yeah, this was great.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, and I'm very grateful.
Great.